Steve Harvey had dropped a lot of things on the Family Feud stage over the years. Punchlines, microphones, his jaw at least once a week whenever a contestant gave an answer so wild it short-circuited his brain. But in all his years of hosting, he had never dropped his cue cards. Those cards were his anchor, his compass, the one physical object that kept the show moving no matter what chaos erupted around him. Until September 2025. On a Friday afternoon that started like every other taping, a woman named Marguerite stood at the podium, answered a survey question, and said 6 words that made Steve Harvey's hands go limp. The cards slipped from his fingers, scattered across the stage floor, and he did not pick them up. He did not even look at them. He stood there, staring at Marguerite, staring at her husband who was standing 4 feet away, and he said nothing. Because what Marguerite had just admitted, calmly and without apology on national television, was not something you could respond to with a joke or a transition or a survey says. She had just told 200 people and millions of future viewers that she had married her husband for his money. And her husband, a man who had stood beside her for 18 years, heard it at the same time as everyone else. If you believe that the truth has a way of finding the light no matter how long it's been buried, subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications. Because what happened after those cards hit the floor is one of the most shocking and emotional moments in the entire history of Family Feud. The Ashford family from Buckhead, Atlanta, arrived at the Family Feud studio with the kind of effortless polish that came from a lifetime of looking the part. There were 5 of them. Terrence Ashford, 56, the founder and CEO of a boutique commercial development firm that had built shopping centers and mixed-use properties across the Southeast. His wife, Marguerite, 45, who described herself on the application as a homemaker and philanthropist. Their daughter, Camille, 19, a freshman at Spelman College. Terrence's son from a previous relationship, Donovan, 28, a project manager at his father's company. And Marguerite's younger sister, Nicole, 39, a flight attendant based out of Hartsfield-Jackson who had rearranged her schedule to be on the show because Marguerite had asked, and because Nicole had long since learned that saying no to Marguerite was not worth the consequences. Terrence Ashford was the kind of man people noticed. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the easy authority of someone who had been building things his entire life, first with his hands and then with his name. He had grown up in Decatur, Georgia, the son of a construction foreman and a school bus driver. His father, a man named Harold Ashford, worked 6 days a week pouring concrete and framing walls, and he brought Terrence to job sites on Saturdays starting when the boy was 10. Terrence learned how buildings went together by watching his father's hands, and he learned how money worked by watching his father's frustration. Harold built other people's dreams for 35 years and never accumulated enough to build his own. Terrence swore that would not be his story. He got a business degree from Georgia State, worked construction during the day, and studied for his real estate license at night. And by 27, he had closed his first commercial development deal, a small strip mall in Kinnears that he financed with a mix of savings, a small business loan, and money borrowed from 3 relatives who believed in him. The strip mall succeeded. The second project succeeded. By 35, Terrence Ashford Development was one of the most respected boutique firms in Atlanta. By 40, Terrence had built a personal fortune that his father, who had passed away from a heart attack at 61, never lived to see. Terrence named every one of his buildings after his father. Harold Ashford Plaza, the Herald, Ashford Commons. It was the only kind of memorial that made sense to a man who expressed love through what he built. Terrence's first marriage had ended when Donovan was 3. It was an amicable split between 2 people who had married young and grown in different directions. Terrence had full custody by mutual agreement, and he raised Donovan with the same hands-on intensity he brought to everything. He was at every game, every school event, every parent-teacher conference. He cooked dinner most nights. He checked homework. He was, by every measure, a devoted and present father. When people asked Terrence about his success, he always gave the same answer. I build buildings during the day. I build my son at night. The buildings make money. The sun makes meaning. It was the kind of line that made people trust him because it was not a line at all. It was the truth. He met Marguerite when he was 37 and she was 26. She was working as an event coordinator at the Four Seasons in Midtown Atlanta when Terrence's firm held a groundbreaking reception there. Marguerite was beautiful in a way that stopped conversations. Tall, elegant, with dark eyes and a smile that she deployed with surgical precision. She was smart. She was charming. She knew how to talk to wealthy men because she had spent 3 years coordinating events for them, learning their habits, their vanities, their pressure points. She knew what they wanted to hear and when they wanted to hear it, and she had learned to deliver those things with a naturalness that made it impossible to tell where the performance ended and the person began. Marguerite had grown up in a two-bedroom apartment in College Park, Georgia, one of 4 children raised by a mother who worked double shifts at a hotel laundry facility. Her father was in and out of the picture, mostly out. There was never enough money. The electricity was shut off twice that Marguerite remembered. The car was repossessed once. The landlord threatened eviction 3 times. Marguerite wore hand-me-downs and ate free school lunches and learned, before she was old enough to articulate it, that poverty was not just the absence of money. It was the absence of choices, of dignity, of the ability to say no to things that should never be tolerated. She swore the same way Terrence's father had sworn to build a better life, that she would never be poor again. But where Terrence's father had chosen work as his escape route, Marguerite chose marriage. She did not choose Terrence because she did not love him. The truth was more complicated than that. She loved parts of him. She loved his confidence. She loved his ambition. She loved the way he spoke about his father and the way he raised Donovan. But she had chosen him, specifically and deliberately, because he was wealthy. She had chosen him because his success meant she would never go back to College Park, never go back to hand-me-downs and shut-off notices and the suffocating helplessness of having no choices. She chose security. And for 18 years, she had lived inside that choice, building a life that looked from the outside like love, and that contained love, real love in places, but that was fundamentally constructed on a foundation that Terrence did not know about. Nicole, Marguerite's sister, knew the truth. She had known it since before the wedding. She had tried to talk to Marguerite about it once early on, and Marguerite had shut her down with a coldness that Nicole never forgot. "I'm not doing anything wrong," Marguerite had said. "I love Terrence. I just also love not being poor, and if that makes me a bad person, then I'd rather be a bad person with a roof over my head than a good person sleeping in my car." Nicole had said nothing further, but she carried the knowledge like a stone in her pocket, and every time she watched Terrence look at Marguerite with the unguarded adoration of a man who believed he had been chosen for who he was, Nicole felt the weight of that stone. Donovan, Terrence's son, had a complicated relationship with Marguerite. He respected her. He was polite to her. But he had never fully trusted her, not because of anything she had done, but because of something he could not name. An instinct. The feeling that the temperature in the room changed when his father's business was discussed, that Marguerite tracked the company's performance the way a stockbroker tracked a portfolio. He never said this to his father. Some suspicions are too disloyal to speak aloud, especially when you have no proof and when speaking them would break the heart of the person you love most in the world. Camille, the daughter Terrence and Marguerite shared, was the genuine bridge between them. She was the part of the marriage that was undeniably real. Terrence adored her. Marguerite adored her. Whatever the foundation of the marriage was, Camille was built on the part of it that was authentic, the part where 2 people had created something they both loved without condition or calculation. Camille looked like her mother and laughed like her father, and had no idea that the family she had grown up in was standing on ground that was about to shift. The morning of the taping, the family arrived in a black Escalade that Terrence drove himself. He opened the door for Marguerite. He carried her bag. He introduced himself to the production assistants by first name and shook every hand. Marguerite walked in wearing a cream blouse and gold earrings that cost more than some of the production team's monthly rent. She was composed, camera-ready, and operating with the seamless confidence of a woman who had spent 18 years performing a version of herself so convincingly that she had almost forgotten the performance was happening. Almost. Nicole walked 3 steps behind them and said nothing. Donovan walked beside his father. Camille walked between her parents, holding both their hands, smiling the wide, uncomplicated smile of a 19-year-old who thought today was going to be the best day of her life. The Ashford family was matched against the DeLuca family from Tampa, Florida. Steve Harvey opened with his usual warmth and humor, and the audience settled into the rhythm. During introductions, Steve reached Terrence and asked what he did. "I build shopping centers," Terrence said with a grin. "My daddy poured concrete, I just made it a little fancier." The audience laughed. Steve shook his hand and said, "I love a man who remembers where he came from." When Steve reached Marguerite, she smiled with practiced elegance and said, "I'm a full-time mom and I do some charity work." Steve nodded. "What kind of charity?" Marguerite said, "Arts education for underserved communities." Steve said, "That's beautiful." It was. It was also funded entirely by Terrence's money, organized entirely by Marguerite's social network, and motivated, at least in part, by the image it projected. But none of that was visible. All that was visible was a beautiful woman with a beautiful answer and a beautiful smile. The first round went to the Ashfords. Terrence won the face-off, and the family played with the polished teamwork of people who were accustomed to performing well in public. Marguerite gave a correct answer and received a kiss on the cheek from Terrence, who was visibly proud of her. Donovan gave a correct answer and nodded quietly. Camille gave a correct answer and jumped up and down. Nicole gave a correct answer and looked relieved. It was a normal, functional, warm-looking family round. The audience clapped. Steve grinned. The machine hummed. The second round introduced the first hairline crack. The question was, name something a wife appreciates most about her husband. It was Marguerite's turn at the podium. She paused for a moment, and in that pause, something flickered across her face so briefly that only the camera caught it. A hesitation. The hesitation of a woman sorting through possible answers and filtering out the ones that were too honest. She said, his hard work. Number 2 answer, 33 points. The audience clapped. Terrence beamed. It was a perfectly acceptable answer. But Nicole, standing at the far end of the podium, noticed that Marguerite had not said his love, or his kindness, or his heart. She had said his hard work. The thing that generated the money, the foundation of the arrangement. Nicole said nothing. The stone in her pocket grew heavier. The third round was the round that detonated. The question landed in the studio with the innocence of a spark in a room full of gasoline. Name a reason someone might stay in a marriage even if they're not happy. The Ashfords were playing the round. Answers came from the family. Donovan said, the children. Correct, number 2. Camille said, they still love the person. Correct, number 3. Terrence said, they took a vow. Correct, number 4. And then it was Marguerite's turn. One answer remained on the board. One answer that had been waiting for 18 years to be spoken, buried under layers of performance and charm and carefully constructed normalcy. The one answer that Marguerite had been carrying since the day she walked into the Four Seasons and decided that Terrence Ashford's success was her way out of College Park. Marguerite walked to the podium. She placed her hands on the surface. She looked at the board. She looked at Steve. And then something happened that nobody expected, least of all Marguerite herself. The filter failed. The machinery of performance and self-preservation that had operated flawlessly for 18 years simply stopped working. Maybe it was the lights. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe it was the question itself, aimed so directly at the truth that her defenses could not redirect it. Whatever the cause, when Marguerite opened her mouth, the answer that came out was not the one she had planned. It was the one she had been hiding. The money, Marguerite said, 2 words, spoken clearly, without qualification, without a laugh to soften it, without an immediate correction or a just kidding or any of the escape routes that a practiced performer would normally have deployed in a fraction of a second. She just said it. The money. And the moment the words left her mouth, her face changed, not with relief, with horror. The horror of a woman who had just heard herself say the quiet part out loud, in front of 200 people, in front of her husband, in front of her daughter, on a stage with cameras recording every angle, and who understood in the space between one heartbeat and the next that she could not take it back. The board revealed the answer. Number 1, 48 points. The highest scoring single answer of the entire taping day. The audience did not cheer. They did not clap. They sat in a silence that was so complete you could hear the hum of the air conditioning system cycling through the overhead vents. 200 people holding their breath, watching the fallout of 2 words detonate across a family in real time. Steve Harvey's cue cards slipped from his hand. They hit the stage floor with a sound like shuffling leaves, and Steve did not look at them. He did not bend to pick them up. He stood at his podium, his mouth slightly open, his eyes locked on Marguerite with an expression that combined disbelief, recognition, and a deep, complicated sadness. Because Steve Harvey was not just a game show host. He was a man who had been married 3 times. He was a man who understood the architecture of failed relationships. And he recognized instantly the specific kind of devastation that was about to unfold because the answer was not wrong. It was the number 1 answer on the board. 100 people had been surveyed, and the most common reason they gave for staying in an unhappy marriage was money. Marguerite had not said anything unusual. She had said something universal. But the way she said it, the way the filter failed, the way her face crumbled with recognition, told every person in that studio that this was not a strategic answer. It was a confession. Terrence stood at the family podium. For 3 full seconds he did not move. His body was still. His face was still. He looked like a man who had been flash-frozen in the exact moment of comprehension, the moment when a truth he had never suspected landed with its full weight and rearranged everything he thought he knew about his own life. Then his head turned slowly toward Marguerite. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the floor. Her hands, still flat on the podium, were trembling. "The money," Terrence said. His voice was quiet, not angry, quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a very loud thing happens inside someone's chest and all the energy goes inward. You said the money? Marguerite did not answer. She could not. She was standing at the podium of a game show on national television, and she was drowning in the silence of her own truth. Camille's face was the worst thing in the room. She was looking at her mother with an expression that no 19-year-old should ever have to wear, the expression of a child who has just learned that a piece of the world she trusted was not what she thought it was. Donovan stood motionless, his arms at his sides, his jaw locked, and on his face was not surprise. It was confirmation. The instinct he had carried for years, the one he had never spoken aloud, had just been validated in the most brutal way possible. Nicole had her eyes closed. She was not surprised either. She was grieving the arrival of a moment she had seen coming for 18 years. Steve Harvey bent down and picked up his cue cards. He gathered them slowly, one by one, straightening them against his palm. It was a small, mechanical act, and he used it to buy himself the seconds he needed to find the right words. When he stood up, he set the cards on the podium, face down, and walked to the center of the stage. "We need to stop for a moment," he said. His voice was steady but stripped of its usual warmth. It was the voice of a man navigating something that required absolute precision. He looked at Marguerite. "Marguerite, I'm going to talk to you and I need you to look at me." Marguerite raised her head. Her eyes were red. Her composure, the immaculate composure that had defined her public presence for 18 years, was gone. In its place was the face of a woman who had been caught not by a trick or a trap, but by the one thing she could never fully control, herself. "You gave an answer to a survey question," Steve said, "and I watched your face when you said it. That was not a strategy. That was something that has been sitting inside you for a long time, and it came out before you could stop it." Marguerite's chin trembled. She nodded almost imperceptibly. Steve turned to Terrence. "Terrence, I know you're hurting right now. And I know that what you just heard is going to take more than this stage and more than this moment to process. But I want to say something to you before this goes any further." Terrence was looking at Steve with the focus of a man holding himself together by sheer force of will. "You built everything you have from nothing. Your father poured concrete. You built an empire. You named every building after him because that's the kind of man you are. And the woman you chose, the woman you have loved for 18 years, just told this room that money was a reason she stayed." Steve paused. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you how to feel about that, but I am going to tell you what I see. I see a man who deserves to be chosen for who he is, not for what he built. And I see a woman who is terrified right now, not because she got caught, but because she knows that what she said is not the whole truth. It's a piece of a truth. And the rest of that truth is something that only the two of you can figure out." He turned back to Marguerite. "Marguerite, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer it the way you answered that survey question, not carefully, honestly." The studio was silent. "Do you love this man?" Marguerite looked at Terrence. The 18 years of performance and presentation and careful curation fell away, and what was left was raw, unprotected, and unmistakable. Her voice broke on the first word. "Yes, I love him. I have loved him for years, but I did not marry him because I loved him. I married him because he could give me a life I was terrified of not having. And somewhere along the way, the love became real. But I have lived every single day knowing that the foundation was wrong, knowing that if he ever found out how it started, I would lose everything. And I just lost everything on a game show." She pressed her hands to her face and sobbed. The studio was in collective shock. This was not a villain's confession. This was a woman from poverty who had made a calculated decision at 26 to escape a life of deprivation, and who had then, genuinely and against her own plan, fallen in love with the man she had chosen for the wrong reasons. The audience was not sure whether to be angry or heartbroken. Many of them were both. Terrence had not moved. He stood at the podium, listening to every word, and his expression shifted as Marguerite spoke. The frozen shock thawed into something more complex. Pain, yes. Betrayal, yes. But beneath those, something else. The recognition of a man who had spent his life understanding foundations, who knew that buildings stood or fell based on what was underneath them, and who was now being forced to examine the foundation of the most important structure in his life. He spoke for the first time since the answer. "You married me for my money." It was not a question. Marguerite nodded, tears streaming. "And then you loved me." Another nod. "And you never told me." Marguerite shook her head. "For 18 years, you never told me." The pain in his voice was immense, but beneath it there was something that surprised the audience. There was a question, not the angry question of a man who wanted to punish, the genuine question of a man who wanted to understand. "Why didn't you tell me, Marguerite? If the love became real, why didn't you just tell me?" Marguerite looked at him with an anguish that was physically palpable. "Because I was afraid you'd never believe the love was real once you knew how it started, and I couldn't survive losing you, Terrence. Not after I actually fell in love with you. The lie was easier than the risk." Steve Harvey was wiping his eyes. The audience was weeping, not because they approved of what Marguerite had done. But because the human complexity of it, the poverty, the calculation, the unexpected love, the 18-year secret, the terror of exposure was so layered and so real that it defied simple judgment. Steve said, quietly, "This is the most complicated thing I have ever witnessed on this stage, and I'm not going to pretend I have an answer for it, but I will say this." He looked at both of them. "The truth is out now. And the truth, no matter how ugly its beginning, is the only place where something honest can be built. You've been building on a secret for 18 years. Now you can build on the truth. What you build is up to you." The audience responded with applause that was somber and sustained. Not a standing ovation, something quieter. The sound of people recognizing that they were witnessing a moment that did not have a clean resolution, and that the absence of a clean resolution was what made it real. The game resumed. The family was shaken but present. Steve gave them the option to stop. Terrence shook his head. "We came here as a family, we'll finish as a family." It was the kind of thing Terrence said, structural, certain, even now. The Ashfords qualified for fast money. Donovan went first, stoic and focused, and scored 116 points. Then Marguerite walked to the podium. The audience fell silent, not with the warmth they had shown other women on this stage, with something more cautious. More watchful. Marguerite was not the sympathetic hero of this story. She was something more complicated. She was a woman who had done something wrong for understandable reasons, who had lived inside that wrong for nearly 2 decades, and who was now standing under lights that offered no shadows to hide in. Steve began. "Name something people are afraid to lose." "The person they love," Marguerite said. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "Name something that takes a long time to build." "Trust." "Name something people hide from their partner." "Where they came from." Steve paused at that one. The audience inhaled. "Name something that is more important than money." "Being chosen." "Name something you wish you could take back." Marguerite closed her eyes. When she opened them, she was looking directly into the camera. "The lie," she said. The board revealed the answers. "The person they love for something people are afraid to lose." Number 1 answer, 41 points. "Trust for something that takes a long time to build." Number 1 answer, 38 points, 2 in a row. "Where they came from for something people hide from their partner." Number 1 answer, 33 points, 3 consecutive number 1 answers. The audience was reacting now, not with the joyful frenzy of previous episodes, but with a stunned, grudging awe. "Being chosen for something more important than money." Number 1 answer, 27 points, 4 in a row. Steve was shaking his head slowly. "The lie for something you wish you could take back." Number 1 answer, 34 points, perfect score, 173 points. Combined with Donovan's 116, the family had 289 points and the $20,000 prize. The studio responded with an ovation that was complicated. It held admiration for the performance and unresolved feelings about the performer. It held recognition that Marguerite's answers, every single one of them, had been honest in a way that her life had not been. The person they love. Trust. Where they came from. Being chosen. The lie. 5 answers that told the story of a woman who had spent 18 years hiding from the truth and who had, in the space of one afternoon, been stripped of every hiding place. Camille was the first to reach her mother. She came out from behind the partition and wrapped her arms around Marguerite with a fierceness that said more than words could. Whatever Marguerite had done, whatever the foundation was, Camille's love was not conditional on the origin story. She held her mother and she wept, and Marguerite held her back and whispered, "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry." Nicole joined them, her hand on Marguerite's back, her eyes closed, the stone in her pocket finally, at long last, set down. Donovan stood nearby, his expression unreadable but his presence deliberate. He was not embracing Marguerite, but he was not leaving. He was standing in the complicated middle ground of a man whose instinct had been proven right and who was now trying to figure out what that proof meant for the family he was part of. Terrence stood apart. He watched his daughter hold his wife. He watched Nicole's hand on Marguerite's back. He watched Donovan standing at the edge of the group with his hands in his pockets. And then he walked forward, not to Marguerite, to Camille. He put his arms around his daughter, and through his daughter he was close enough to Marguerite that their shoulders touched. It was not forgiveness. It was not reconciliation. It was presence. The decision to remain in the room, in the mess, in the truth, because leaving would have meant leaving Camille in the middle of it alone. And Terrence Ashford, who had never left his children in the middle of anything, was not going to start now. ACT 5. The legacy, 16, 0020, 00 plus backstage. The family spent over an hour in a private room before anyone left. Steve Harvey joined them for part of it. He spoke with Terrence alone for nearly 15 minutes. The conversation was never made public, but Steve later said in an interview that it was one of the most difficult and most important conversations he had ever had. "I told Terrence what I believed, which is that Marguerite's love for him is real. I saw it on her face when she answered my question. But I also told him that the lie was real too, and that he had every right to feel whatever he was feeling for as long as he needed to feel it. Nobody gets to put a timeline on that kind of pain. Steve also said that Terrence had asked him a question that Steve could not answer. Terrence asked, "How do you love someone after you find out the reason they chose you was a lie?" Steve said, "I told him I didn't know, but I told him that the fact he was asking the question instead of walking out the door meant that the answer was still possible." Steve spoke with Marguerite separately. He told her that what happened on that stage was going to define her life from this point forward, and that the only way to honor the truth that had come out was to keep telling it. "You've been performing for 18 years, Steve told her. "The performance is over. Whatever comes next has to be built on what's real, and what's real is messy and painful and uncertain, but it's also the only thing worth building on." Marguerite told Steve something he later described as the most haunting thing anyone had ever said to him on the show. She said, "Mr. Harvey, I grew up so poor that I learned to see people as opportunities before I learned to see them as people. By the time I saw Terrence as a person, I was already too deep into the lie to get out. I don't expect anyone to forgive me for that, but I need someone to understand that poverty doesn't just take your money. It takes your ability to trust that anything good can come to you without a strategy. And that is what I lost. That is what I am grieving." The episode aired 6 weeks later. The response was the most divided in Family Feud history. The clip of Marguerite saying the money was viewed over 80 million times in its first 3 days. Steve Harvey dropping his cue cards became an instantly iconic image, screenshot and memed and referenced across every platform. But unlike previous viral feud moments, the audience was not unified. The comment sections and social media threads were split. Some people condemned Marguerite as a gold digger who had deceived a good man. Others defended her as a woman who had escaped poverty the only way she knew how and who had, against all expectations, found real love inside an arrangement that began without it. The debate was fierce, emotional, and deeply personal because Marguerite's story touched on questions that had no easy answers. Questions about poverty, about survival, about the difference between choosing someone and settling for someone, and about whether love that grows from the wrong soil can ever be truly trusted. The hashtag #MarriedForMoney trended for 8 days. But a counter hashtag emerged almost immediately, "Loved Him Anyway," started by a woman in Memphis who posted her own story. She wrote, "I married my husband because he had a steady job and I had nothing. I'm not ashamed of that. What I'm ashamed of is that I never told him. And now I've been in love with him for 14 years and I'm terrified that the truth will end everything." Marguerite said what I've been holding for over a decade. She is not a villain. She is me. The post was shared over 2 million times. Thousands of women responded with their own versions of the same story. The conversation Marguerite had accidentally started became one of the most nuanced public discussions about marriage, class, and economic survival that had ever taken place on social media. The response from poverty advocacy organizations was significant and unexpected. Several major nonprofits cited Marguerite's story in fundraising and awareness campaigns, using it to illustrate how economic deprivation shapes decision-making in ways that people who have never experienced it cannot fully understand. A professor of sociology at Columbia University wrote an essay that was shared widely, arguing that Marguerite's story was not really about marriage at all. It was about the long shadow of poverty, which does not end when the poverty ends, but continues to shape how people relate to security, trust, and love for decades after the last bill has been paid. The essay was read by over 4 million people. The impact on the Ashford family unfolded slowly and without the clean narrative arc that audiences expected. Terrence and Marguerite did not separate immediately. They did not reconcile immediately. They existed in a space that had no name, the space between the truth and whatever comes after it. They attended couples therapy twice a week. The sessions were grueling. Terrence's grief was not just about the lie. It was about the recalibration of 18 years of memories. Every moment he had believed was spontaneous, he now had to re-examine. Every "I love you" he had received, he now had to ask whether it was real. Marguerite's work in therapy was different. She had to learn for the first time how to be honest inside a relationship, how to allow herself to be loved for who she was instead of performing a version of herself designed to be loved. The therapist told them both that the process would take years, not months. They committed to staying in it. Camille struggled. She loved both of her parents and could not reconcile the mother she knew, the woman who braided her hair and drove her to dance class and sat with her through college application anxiety, with the woman who had married her father for money. She began seeing a therapist of her own. In one session, she said something that her therapist later asked permission to share anonymously in a professional paper. Camille said, "My mom lied about why she married my dad, but she didn't lie about loving me. And she didn't lie about loving him. She lied about how it started, and I'm trying to figure out if the way something starts is more important than the way it becomes." It was a question that philosophers and theologians and ordinary people had been asking for thousands of years, and Camille Ashford, at 19, had articulated it with a precision that belied her age. Donovan's response was the most measured. He had suspected the truth for years and had carried that suspicion alone. After the episode, he spoke with his father privately. He told Terrence that he had sensed something was off, but had never wanted to voice it because he was afraid of being wrong and even more afraid of being right. Terrence told his son that having the instinct and choosing to protect his father's happiness rather than validate his own suspicion was one of the most selfless things anyone had ever done for him. Donovan said, "I didn't protect you, Dad. I just didn't want to be the one who broke it." Terrence said, "Nobody broke anything, son. Marguerite told the truth. The truth doesn't break things. It shows you where the breaks already are." It was, Donovan later said, the most important thing his father ever taught him. Nicole, Marguerite's sister, finally set down the stone she had been carrying for 18 years. She and Marguerite had a long, tearful conversation in the weeks following the episode. Nicole told Marguerite that she had been angry for years, not at Marguerite for the lie, but at the circumstances that made the lie feel necessary. "We grew up with nothing," Nicole said. "You did what you thought you had to do to survive. I went a different way. I became a flight attendant so I could leave. You became a wife so you could stay. Neither of us was wrong. We were just poor girls doing what poor girls do when nobody gives them a better option." Marguerite wept harder at those words than she had at any point since the episode aired. Steve Harvey invited the Ashford family back for a follow-up segment 10 months after the original episode. The family that walked onto the stage was visibly different from the one that had appeared 10 months earlier. The polish was gone. In its place was something rougher and more real. Marguerite wore a simple navy dress, no gold earrings, her hair was pulled back. She looked for the first time on camera like a woman who was not performing. Terrence walked beside her but did not hold her hand. The distance between them was visible and honest. They were not pretending things were resolved. They were showing up in the middle of the process, which was, in its own way, braver than showing up at the end. During the segment, Marguerite spoke first. She addressed the audience and the cameras directly. 10 months ago, I said something on this stage that I had been hiding for 18 years. I told the truth about why I married my husband, and I want to say something to every person who watched that clip and formed an opinion about me." She paused. "You are probably right. Whatever you thought, you are probably right. I was calculating. I was strategic. I saw a good man and I chose him for the wrong reason, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life." Another pause. "But I also want you to know that the love I feel for Terrence Ashford is real. It has been real for a very long time, and I am not asking anyone to forgive the way it started. I am asking for the chance to prove what it became." The audience was quiet, not hostile, not warm, quiet in the way people are quiet when they are making room for something honest. Terrence spoke next. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you that I've forgiven Marguerite. I haven't, not yet. Forgiveness takes time, and I've learned in therapy that putting a deadline on it only makes it take longer." He looked at the audience with the steady, direct gaze of a man who had spent his life building things and who understood that some structures could not be rushed. "What I can tell you is that I love her. I have loved her for 18 years, and finding out that the beginning was different from what I thought does not erase what came after. It complicates it, but it doesn't erase it." He paused. "My father built buildings his entire life. He taught me that a foundation matters more than anything else. The foundation of my marriage was flawed, but the building that was built on top of it, our daughter, our home, our life, that was real. And I'm not ready to demolish the building because of the foundation. I'm an engineer. I know you can reinforce a foundation. It's harder, it's more expensive, but it can be done." The audience gave a standing ovation, not because the story was resolved. Because the honesty of it, the refusal to pretend, the willingness to stand on a stage and say, "We are in the middle of something painful and we don't know how it ends," was the most courageous thing they had witnessed. Steve revealed during the segment that the Ashford episode had inspired a unique partnership. Family Feud, in collaboration with a national financial literacy and family counseling organization, had launched Honest Ground, a program providing free financial counseling and couples therapy for low-income couples navigating the intersection of economic stress and relationship dynamics. The program acknowledged what Marguerite's story had made undeniable, that poverty shaped marriages in ways that wealth could not imagine. and that couples needed support for both. The program launched with $3.5 million in funding and a commitment to serve 2,000 families in its first year. 1 year after the episode, Marguerite accepted an invitation to speak at a conference on women and economic empowerment in Washington, D.C. She stood before an audience of 1,500 advocates, policymakers, and women who had survived poverty, and she told her story without omission. She talked about the apartment in College Park, the shut-off notices, the hand-me-downs, the moment she decided that marriage was her exit strategy, the night she met Terrence, the years the love became real, the 18 years of silence, the game show question that ended the silence forever. "People call me a gold digger," Marguerite told the crowd. "And I understand why. What I did looks like greed if you've never been poor. But if you've been poor, if you've lain awake at night listening to your mother cry because she can't pay the electric bill, if you've worn the same shoes to school for 2 years because there's no money for new ones, if you've watched the landlord tape an eviction notice to your door while your siblings are standing behind you, then you know that what I did wasn't greed. It was survival." It was a terrified 26-year-old girl making the only decision she knew how to make to ensure she never went back to that apartment. She paused. "I am not proud of how my marriage started, but I am proud of what it became. I am proud that I love a man who is still willing to sit in a room with me and try to rebuild something I damaged. And I am proud that I finally told the truth, not because the truth set me free. It didn't. The truth set me on fire. At least now I'm standing in the light instead of hiding in the dark." The audience rose. The ovation lasted over 90 seconds. Several women in the front row were weeping, not for Marguerite the television personality, but for the girl from College Park who had made a choice that millions of women had been forced to make, and that most of them had never been honest enough or unlucky enough to say out loud. Terrence and Marguerite Ashford are still married. They still live in the same house in Buckhead. Terrence still builds shopping centers. Marguerite still teaches Camille to drive and argues with Nicole about holiday schedules, and does the charity work that she once did partly for image, and now does entirely because it matters to her. The marriage is not what it was. It is something else. Something more fragile and more honest, and in its own imperfect way, more real than the polished version that existed before a game show question cracked it open. On the desk in Terrence's home office, next to a framed photo of his father on a construction site and a model of the first shopping center he ever built, there is a new frame. It contains a single sheet of paper on which Marguerite has written in her own handwriting the truth, all of it. Why she married him, when the love became real, what she was afraid of, what she is sorry for. Terrence asked her to write it down because he said, "I need to be able to read it on the days when I forget that the woman I married is trying to become the woman who deserves me." Marguerite wrote it in a single sitting, without editing, without filtering, without performance. It was the most honest thing she had ever produced, and Terrence reads it more often than he will ever admit. If this story made you feel something complicated, good. It should. Hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Share it with someone who understands that people are not simple, that survival shapes us in ways we don't always choose, and that the truth, even when it arrives 18 years late, is still the only place where anything real can begin. Because the hardest stories to hear are usually the ones that matter the most.